I never thought a string of Christmas lights would land me in a war with the most insufferable woman in suburban Arizona. But here we are, standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, while she waves a printed copy of HOA bylaws in my face like it's the Constitution itself. Mr. Quinn, I'm telling you for the last time, those decorations are in direct violation of Section 12, subsection 4 of our community guidelines. Patricia Henderson stood there in her powder blue tracksuit, her blonde highlights catching the early morning sun as she jabbed a manicured finger toward my front window. I'd only been living in this Scottsdale neighborhood for 3 months, and she'd already made my life a special kind of hell. I took a sip of my coffee and looked at the window in question. It had a simple strand of multicolored lights around the frame and a small wreath hanging in the center. Nothing crazy, nothing offensive. Just normal holiday decorations that thousands of other houses in America probably had at that exact moment. Patricia, it's December. These are Christmas lights. People put up Christmas lights. I tried to keep my voice level, but this was the 5th time she'd shown up at my door in as many weeks, each time with a new complaint. First, it was my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. Then it was my trash cans being visible from the street for 20 minutes past the pickup time. Last week, she'd actually measured my grass with a ruler to see if it exceeded the 2-inch maximum height requirement. The bylaw clearly states that all exterior decorations must be submitted for approval to the Architectural Review Committee 30 days in advance. You did not submit any such request. She tapped the papers with her nail, making a sharp clicking sound that went straight through my skull. It's Christmas lights, Patricia. They're temporary. They'll be down by January 2nd. Rules are rules, Vincent. If we let one person slide, then everyone will think they can do whatever they want. Before you know it, this neighborhood will look like a trailer park. She said the last 2 words with such disgust that I actually felt my jaw clench. I'm not taking them down. Her eyes narrowed. Then you'll be hearing from our attorney. The HOA has the authority to fine you $250 per day until the violation is corrected. That's $1,750 per week, Mr. Quinn, per week. She turned on her heel and marched back to her white Lexus SUV parked in front of my house, leaving me standing there wondering how my life had come to this. I'd moved to Arizona after my divorce, looking for a fresh start. I'd sold my software company for enough money that I didn't have to work if I didn't want to. And I'd bought this nice 3-bedroom house in what I thought was a quiet, peaceful community. The realtor had mentioned an HOA, but I'd figured it would be one of those things that just made sure people didn't paint their houses neon green or leave broken cars on their lawns. I had no idea I was moving next door to Satan's personal assistant. The first official notice came 2 days later, delivered by certified mail. It included photos of my window decorations taken from multiple angles, along with highlighted sections of the HOA bylaws and a breakdown of potential fines. They were serious. The letter stated that if I didn't remove the decorations within 72 hours, I would begin accruing daily fines of $250. I called my lawyer that afternoon. Greg Patterson had handled my business sale, and while HOA disputes weren't exactly his specialty, he was the only attorney I knew in Arizona. Vincent, buddy, I'm going to be straight with you. HOAs in Arizona have a lot of power. Like, a scary amount of power. They can put a lien on your house if you don't pay the fines. Eventually, they can even foreclose. Greg's voice crackled through my phone speaker as I paced around my kitchen over Christmas lights. That's insane. Yeah, well, welcome to homeowner associations. Did you read the CC and Articus before you bought the house? I skimmed them. They were like 100 pages long. And there's your problem. Look, you've got a few options here. You can take the lights down and submit a formal request for next year. You can fight it, which will cost you more in legal fees than the fines would be. Or you can pay the fines and leave the lights up out of principle, which, given your financial situation, you could probably afford, but it's still pissing money away. None of those options sounded appealing. What if I just ignore them? They'll file a lien on your property, and eventually they'll take your house. I've seen it happen. There was a case in Phoenix a few years ago where someone lost a $300,000 home over $15,000 in unpaid HOA fines. I thanked Greg and hung up, staring out my kitchen window at the house next door. It was vacant, had been since I'd moved in. The yard was maintained, but there were no cars, no furniture visible through the windows, just an empty shell with a for sale sign that had been there so long the colors had faded. An idea started forming in my head. It was crazy. It was petty. It was probably the most expensive middle finger I could possibly give to an HOA president. But I had the money, and honestly, after 3 months of Patricia's harassment, I had the motivation. I called the number on the for sale sign. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Monica Rodriguez, met me at the property the next morning. The house was nearly identical to mine, a mirror image built by the same developer. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a 2-car garage, and about 2,200 square feet. It's been on the market for 8 months, Monica explained as we walked through the empty living room. The previous owners moved out of state for work and have been trying to sell remotely. They're motivated, very motivated. What are they asking? $450,000, but between you and me, they'd probably take $400. Maybe even $390 if you came in with cash and a quick close. The house was in decent shape. Nothing special, but nothing wrong with it either. Beige walls, beige carpet, standard builder-grade fixtures throughout. It was perfectly generic, which was exactly what I needed. I'll give them $380 all cash close in 2 weeks. Monica's eyes widened. Seriously, draw up the paperwork. We closed on the house 12 days later. Patricia didn't know yet. I'd kept the whole thing quiet, parking my car in my own garage whenever I met with Monica or the inspectors. The previous owners accepted my offer within 6 hours, probably doing backflips when they heard someone wanted to pay cash and skip all the usual negotiation nonsense. The day after closing, I went to Home Depot and spent 4 hours walking up and down the aisles, filling 3 shopping carts with every decoration I could find. Christmas lights in every color and style, inflatable snowmen, reindeer and Santas, projection lights that displayed moving snowflakes, wreaths, garland, those ridiculous light-up wire frame presents that people put on their lawns. Then I went to Lowe's and bought more. Then I hit up Target, Walmart, and every seasonal pop-up store I could find within a 20-mile radius. By the time I was done, I'd spent almost $8,000 on decorations and had completely filled the garage of my new house. I started putting them up the next morning, a Saturday. The weather was perfect, mid-70s and sunny, and I worked methodically, starting with strings of lights along the entire roofline. Not just the front, but the sides and back too. Multicolored LEDs that flashed and chased in patterns. I was on a ladder, stapling lights to the eaves when I heard a car door slam. I didn't need to look to know who it was. "What do you think you're doing?" Patricia's voice was shrill even from 30 feet away. I climbed down the ladder and turned to face her. She'd brought reinforcements this time. 2 other women from the neighborhood who I recognized but didn't know by name. One was tall and thin with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. The other was shorter and rounder, wearing a visor despite the fact that she was standing in the shade. "Decorating my house." I gestured to the lights I'd just hung. "You bought this house." Patricia's face had gone red. "Closed on Wednesday. All legal, all official. And before you ask, yes, I'm aware of the HOA bylaws. Yes, I know I'm supposed to submit a request for exterior decorations. And no, I won't be doing that. You can't just, actually, I can. See, I did some reading after our last conversation. The bylaws state that fines are limited to $250 per day per property. Since I now own 2 properties, I can afford to pay $500 a day to keep my decorations up. That's $182,500 a year. Want to know something funny? I made more than that in interest just last month. So fine me every single day. I'll pay it with a smile. The 3 women stood there staring at me like I just told them I was planning to sacrifice goats in my backyard. "This is absurd," Patricia finally sputtered. "This is harassment." "No, Patricia, this is Christmas spirit. You should try it sometime." I turned back to my ladder and continued working. They didn't leave immediately. They stood there for another 10 minutes, whispering among themselves and occasionally shouting up questions that I ignored. Finally, they got in Patricia's Lexus and drove away, but I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I worked on the decorations for 3 solid days. I outlined every window with lights. I put up 6 inflatable figures on the front lawn, including an 8-foot Santa, a 7-foot snowman, and a nativity scene that lit up from the inside. I wrapped the palm trees in the front yard with spiral lights. I installed those icicle lights that hung down from the gutters and created a curtain effect. I set up the projection lights to cast moving images of snowflakes and stars across the entire front of the house. And that was just the front. On the sides, I hung massive wreaths. In the back, I created a winter wonderland scene with more inflatables, more lights, and a sound system that played Christmas music at a volume that was just barely within the legal noise ordinance limits. When I was finished, my new house looked like the North Pole had thrown up on it. It was visible from 3 blocks away. At night, it probably glowed bright enough to be seen from space. It was absolutely, undeniably, gloriously tacky, and I loved every inch of it. The next HOA violation notice arrived on Tuesday. It was even longer than the first one, with more photos and more highlighted sections of bylaws. This time, they'd included violations for excessive noise, excessive lighting, obstruction of sight lines, and something called aesthetic disruption of community standards. The fines added up to $450 per day. I wrote them a check for $13,500, covering the next 30 days, and mailed it with a note that said, "See you in January." The neighborhood reaction was mixed. Some people loved it. Cars started driving slowly past my houses every evening, with kids pressing their faces against windows to see all the lights and inflatables. A few neighbors stopped by to tell me they thought it was hilarious, though most of them asked me not to mention that they'd said so. Apparently, Patricia had a reputation, and nobody wanted to be her next target. Others were less enthusiastic. I got an anonymous letter in my mailbox calling me a menace to property values and suggesting that I move to a less prestigious neighborhood if I wanted to live like trailer trash. That one went straight into the recycling bin, but the real fireworks started at the December HOA meeting. I hadn't planned to attend, but Greg suggested I should, just to show that I wasn't trying to hide from anything. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that mostly got used for yoga classes and book clubs. When I walked in, the room went silent. There were about 40 people there, seated in folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where Patricia and 4 other board members sat. I recognized the tall woman with the gray bun as Margaret Spencer, the vice president. The others I didn't know. I took a seat in the back row. The whispers started immediately. Patricia called the meeting to order and worked through the usual agenda items. Budget reports, upcoming community events, a discussion about resurfacing the tennis courts. Then she got to what everyone was actually there to hear. Item 7 on the agenda, ongoing violation of community standards by a resident who shall remain nameless but who I'm sure you all know. She shot me a look that could have melted steel. As board president, I have taken every available step to address this situation through proper channels. Violation notices have been issued, fines have been assessed, and yet the violations continue with new and increasingly egregious additions being made daily. Actually, I'm done adding decorations, I called out from the back. Everything's up now, nothing new coming. The room turned to look at me. Mr. Quinn, you are not recognized to speak. Please wait until the public comment period. Oh, I'm sorry, when's that? At the end of the meeting. Great, I'll wait. Patricia's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles twitching from 20 feet away. She continued her presentation, pulling up photos of my decorated house on a projector screen. In the dark room, with the images blown up to 6 feet wide, the display looked even more spectacular than it did in person. I actually felt a little surge of pride. As you can see, this is completely unacceptable for our community. We have standards, we have rules, and when one person decides that they are above those rules, it affects all of us. Property values decline. The character of the neighborhood changes. Before long, we're no different from any other random subdivision with no sense of pride or cohesion. Margaret Spencer leaned forward. Have the fines been paid? Yes, Patricia admitted, sounding annoyed by the fact. Mr. Quinn has paid all assessed fines to date. So he's in compliance, financially speaking. That's not the point, Margaret. The point is that he shouldn't be creating these violations in the first place. A man in the third row raised his hand. Patricia ignored him for a moment, then reluctantly called on him. Yeah, hi, David Chen from Desert Vista Drive. I guess I'm just wondering what the actual problem is here. I mean, the guy's paying his fines. It's Christmas. The decorations are temporary, right? 4 to 6 weeks is hardly temporary, Patricia snapped. It's pretty standard for Christmas decorations, though. My lights stay up from Thanksgiving to New Year's. So do most people's. But your lights are tasteful, David. You have a simple strand of white lights on your house and a wreath on your door. That's appropriate. That's classy. This. She gestured to the screen. This is a circus. It's also technically legal, I said from the back row. You are not recognized to speak. Right, sorry, I'll save it for public comment. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, with Patricia making increasingly desperate arguments for why the board needed to take further action. She suggested increasing the fine amounts, though the board attorney had apparently already told her that would require a community vote. She proposed adding new bylaws that would specifically prohibit the kind of decorations I'd installed. But that would also require a vote and wouldn't apply retroactively. She even floated the idea of taking me to court for creating a public nuisance. But that suggestion died quickly when someone pointed out that would cost the HOA tens of thousands in legal fees with no guarantee of success. Finally, we got to the public comment period. I stood up and walked to the microphone that had been set up at the front of the room. Hi, everyone. Vincent Quinn, Desert Ridge Court. I'll keep this brief. I moved to this neighborhood because I liked the houses and the location. I had no intention of causing any problems. But from day one, Patricia has been on my case about every tiny thing. My mailbox, my trash cans, my grass, my holiday decorations. I tried to be reasonable. I tried to follow the rules. But the rules, as enforced by this board, are ridiculous. That's out of order, Patricia started, but I kept talking. I'm a homeowner. I pay my mortgage, I pay my property taxes, I pay my HOA dues, and I now pay my fines, every single one, on time and in full. What I do with my property, as long as it's legal and I'm willing to accept the financial consequences, is my business. If this board wants to keep fining me, go ahead. I'll keep paying. But I'm not taking down my decorations, and I'm not apologizing for having a little fun and bringing some joy to what has otherwise been a pretty hostile neighborhood experience. I sat back down. The room was quiet for a moment, then a few people started clapping. Not everyone, maybe a quarter of the room, but enough to make Patricia's face turn an even deeper shade of red. The meeting ended shortly after that, with no real resolution. The board voted to continue assessing fines, which I'd expected. But they couldn't do anything else without changing the bylaws, which would require a majority vote of all homeowners in the community, not just the board. As people filed out, several stopped to shake my hand or tell me quietly that they supported what I was doing. David Chen invited me to a neighborhood poker game. An older couple said their grandkids loved driving past my house. But as I was leaving, Patricia cornered me in the parking lot. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Her voice was low and angry, the fake pleasantness she'd maintained during the meeting completely gone. "You think you can just buy your way out of having to follow the same rules as everyone else?" "I am following the rules, Patricia. I'm paying the fines." That's literally what the rules say happens when you have a violation. You're making a mockery of this community. "No, I'm putting up Christmas lights. You're the one making it into something bigger than it needs to be." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "I've been president of this HOA for 6 years. 6 years of keeping this neighborhood beautiful, of maintaining our standards, of making sure people like you don't drag us all down to your level. I'm not going to let you ruin that. People like me." "What exactly does that mean?" "You know what it means. People with no class, no taste, no respect for community values. You show up here with your new money thinking you can do whatever you want, that rules don't apply to you. Well, I have news for you, Mr. Quinn. I will find a way to stop this, whatever it takes." She turned and walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there in the parking lot wondering if that had just crossed the line from annoying HOA president to actual threat. I called Greg the next morning and told him what Patricia had said. "Whatever it takes is pretty vague," he said. "It's not really actionable as a threat, but document everything from now on. Keep records of every interaction, every letter, every conversation. If she escalates, we want to have a paper trail." "You think she'll actually try something?" "I think she's used to getting her way, and you're the first person who's had the resources and the stubbornness to stand up to her. People like that don't handle losing very well." Greg turned out to be prophetic. 3 days later, I got a notice from the Scottsdale Building Department saying that someone had filed a complaint about unpermitted electrical work at my property. An inspector would be coming by to verify that all exterior lighting had been installed according to code. I knew immediately who'd filed the complaint, but there was nothing I could do about it. Anonymous complaints are allowed, and building departments have to follow up on them. I called an electrician and had him come out to inspect everything before the city inspector arrived. He confirmed that all my lights were plugged into properly rated outdoor outlets with GFCI protection, and that nothing was overloaded or unsafe. The city inspector agreed. He spent 20 minutes checking everything, then told me I was good to go. He also mentioned, with a slight grin, that he'd gotten 4 similar complaints about other houses in the neighborhood in the past week, all anonymous, all about properties that turned out to be completely fine. "Someone's got it out for this neighborhood," he said. "Or someone in this neighborhood has too much time on their hands." Patricia's harassment campaign had officially begun. Over the next 2 weeks, I received visits from code enforcement about my grass being too long, even though I'd had it cut 3 days earlier. I got a noise complaint filed with the police about my Christmas music, even though I'd measured the volume myself and knew it was well within legal limits. The officer who responded was apologetic and clearly thought it was a waste of his time. Someone filed a report, with the HOA claiming that my inflatables were creating a traffic hazard because people were slowing down to look at them. The fire department got an anonymous tip that my decorations were blocking emergency access to my house, which resulted in a very confused firefighter showing up to verify that yes, indeed, there was still plenty of room for a fire truck to park in my driveway. Every complaint was filed anonymously. Every complaint was baseless, and every complaint was clearly coming from the same source, but I still had no proof. Then Patricia made a mistake. It was 3 days before Christmas, late in the evening. I was inside my main house watching a movie when I heard a crash outside. I jumped up and ran to the front door, flipping on the porch light. Patricia was standing in the yard of my decorated house, holding a long stick that looked like it might have been a pool skimmer. Around her feet were the deflated remains of my 8-foot Santa inflatable. She'd popped it, stabbing through the fabric multiple times. "Hey!" I shouted, running across my driveway. "What the hell are you doing?" She spun around, and even in the dim light from the street lamps, I could see the wild look in her eyes. This wasn't just annoying HOA President Patricia anymore. This was someone who'd snapped. "This ends tonight," she said, raising the stick. "I'm done playing games with you. You're vandalizing my property. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, call them. I'll tell them you're the one who's been harassing this neighborhood for weeks. You and your trashy decorations and your complete disregard for everyone around you." I already had my phone out, dialing 911. Patricia saw this and apparently decided to get her money's worth. She moved to the next inflatable, a 7-foot snowman, and stabbed it twice before it started deflating with a sad whooshing sound. "Madam, I need to report a vandalism in progress," I said when the dispatcher answered. I gave her my address and a description of what was happening. Patricia moved on to the third inflatable, a reindeer, but I stepped between her and it. "Get out of my way," she hissed. "No, you're done. The police are on their way." For a moment, I thought she might actually hit me with the pole. Her knuckles were white where she gripped it, and her whole body was shaking. But then we both heard the sirens in the distance, and something in her face changed. The wild anger drained away, replaced by fear. She dropped the pole and turned to leave, but I blocked her path to her car. "Oh no. You wanted to finish this tonight. We're finishing it. You're waiting right here until the police arrive. You can't keep me here. That's false imprisonment. You're free to leave on foot, but I'm standing between you and your car and I'm not moving. Your choice." She chose to wait. We stood there in awkward silence for the 3 minutes it took for the Scottsdale PD to arrive. 2 officers got out of the patrol car, hands resting casually near their belts as they assessed the situation. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" the older officer asked. His nameplate read Mitchell. "This woman just vandalized my property. She used that pole to destroy 3 of my inflatable decorations." I pointed to the evidence scattered across my lawn. Officer Mitchell looked at Patricia. "Madam, is that true?" Patricia drew herself up to her full height, trying to regain some dignity. "Officer, You don't understand the situation. This man has been harassing our entire neighborhood for weeks with this obscene display. The HOA has tried to work with him, but he refuses to follow the rules. Someone needed to take action. So you decided to commit vandalism, the younger officer, whose nameplate said Torres, asked. I was protecting our community. By destroying someone else's property. By removing a public nuisance. Officer Mitchell sighed the sigh of someone who dealt with too many HOA disputes in his career. Madam, I don't care about HOA rules or neighborhood disputes. What I care about is that you, by your own admission, just intentionally damaged property that doesn't belong to you. That's criminal damage. This is ridiculous. He's the one who should be arrested for what he's done to this neighborhood. Christmas decorations aren't illegal, madam. Vandalism is. The officers took statements from both of us. I offered to pull up my security camera footage, which I had installed the previous week after all the anonymous complaints started. The cameras clearly showed Patricia approaching the house with the pole, stabbing the inflatables, and attempting to flee. After reviewing the footage on my phone, Officer Mitchell placed Patricia under arrest for criminal damage. She was furious, shouting about lawsuits and abuse of power and community standards, as Officer Torres put her in handcuffs and led her to the patrol car. You'll need to file a formal complaint and get estimates for the damage, Officer Mitchell told me, for the value of the items destroyed. The county attorney will contact you about pressing charges. I definitely want to press charges. Can't say I blame you. Between you and me. He glanced around to make sure Patricia was out of earshot. Every neighborhood's got someone like her, someone who thinks being on the HOA board makes them queen of the universe. Usually takes something like this to knock them back down to earth. The officers left, taking Patricia with them. I stood in my yard, looking at the deflated Santa, snowmen, and reindeer lying on the ground like casualties of the world's strangest battle. Then I went back inside, got online, and ordered replacements. Bigger ones this time. A 10-foot Santa, a 9-foot snowman, and an entire inflatable nativity scene that was 12 feet long. They'd arrive in 2 days, express shipping. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast that the HOA president had been arrested for vandalizing my decorations. My doorbell rang 6 times before noon, with neighbors stopping by to get the real story. Most were sympathetic. Some were gleeful. A few seemed genuinely shocked that Patricia had gone that far. David Chen stopped by around lunchtime with beers and the full neighborhood gossip. Apparently, Patricia had been released on her own recognizance a few hours after her arrest, but the damage to her reputation was done. Several people were already calling for her to resign from the board. I heard Margaret Spencer is drafting a formal letter requesting her resignation, David said, sitting on my patio and enjoying the 70-degree December weather. Apparently, this isn't the first time Patricia's gone overboard. Last year, she reported someone to Child Protective Services because their kids' toys were visible in the front yard. CPS investigated, found nothing wrong, and the family threatened to sue the HOA. The board settled for $20,000 just to make it go away. You're kidding. Nope. And 3 years ago, she got into a screaming match with a guy who painted his front door the wrong shade of red. She actually keyed his car. He couldn't prove it, but everyone knows it was her. Why do people keep electing her president? Because most people don't pay attention to HOA elections. They get the ballot in the mail, and they either don't vote or they just check the names of whoever's currently in office. Patricia runs unopposed every year because no one else wants the job. It's a lot of work for no pay, and you mostly just deal with complaints and problems. Sounds terrible. It is. But for people like Patricia, it's not about the job. It's about the power. She gets to tell people what to do, and if they don't listen, she can fine them, sue them, make their lives miserable. It attracts a certain kind of person. David left around 2, and I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting the damage and getting repair estimates. The 3 destroyed inflatables had cost about $400 total, which meant Patricia would likely be charged with a misdemeanor. Not exactly the crime of the century, but enough to potentially get her convicted if the county attorney decided to prosecute. The replacement decorations arrived on schedule, and I set them up on Christmas Eve. The new Santa was magnificent, towering over everything else on the lawn. The nativity scene stretched across half the yard, complete with light-up angels and a star that projected a beam of light into the sky. Christmas morning was quiet. I video called my sister in Oregon and my parents in Colorado. My ex-wife sent a polite text wishing me happy holidays, which was civil of her considering how our marriage had ended. I made myself a decent breakfast, watched some basketball, and generally enjoyed the peaceful day. That evening, as the sun set and all my lights came on in their full glory, I sat in a lawn chair in my driveway with a glass of bourbon and just took it all in. The display really was spectacular. Excessive, sure. Over the top, absolutely. But there was something joyful about it, something that made me smile every time I looked at it. Cars continued to drive slowly past, families pointing and taking pictures. A group of kids on bicycles stopped to stare, their eyes wide. One little girl told me it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen, which made the entire ridiculous situation worth it. The day after Christmas, I got a call from an assistant county attorney named Rachel Zimmerman. She wanted to discuss the criminal damage case against Patricia Henderson. "I've reviewed the police report and the video footage," she said. "It's a pretty clear-cut case. We're willing to offer Miss Henderson a plea deal. She'd plead guilty to misdemeanor criminal damage, pay restitution for the items she destroyed, perform 40 hours of community service, and be placed on 6 months of unsupervised probation. What if she doesn't take the plea? Then we go to trial. Based on the evidence, I'm confident we'd get a conviction. But trials take time and resources, and for a first-time offender on a misdemeanor charge, she'd likely get roughly the same sentence anyway. The plea just moves things along faster. Do I get a say in this? You're the victim, so your input matters. If you're strongly opposed to the plea, I'll take that into consideration. But I should tell you that Miss Henderson's attorney is making a lot of noise about her spotless record and her community service as HOA president. They're angling for a diversion program that would eventually dismiss the charges altogether if she stays out of trouble. Absolutely not. She needs this on her record. She's been harassing me and other people in this neighborhood for years, apparently. This needs to have real consequences. Understood. I'll push back on the diversion. The plea deal is the best I can offer, though. That works, as long as she has to admit guilt and pay for what she did. Patricia took the plea deal. I found out through David, who heard it from Margaret Spencer. Patricia would be formally pleading guilty in early January, and per the terms of her probation, she had to resign from the HOA board immediately. The neighborhood held an emergency meeting to elect a new president. This time, I actually paid attention. Margaret Spencer ran unopposed and won easily. Her first act as president was to propose changes to the architectural review process, making it less restrictive and more reasonable. "We need rules," she said during her acceptance speech. "But we also need common sense. An HOA should make a neighborhood better, not turn it into a police state." The proposals passed with overwhelming support. My decorations came down on January 2nd, just like I'd promised Patricia they would weeks earlier. It took me an entire day to pack everything away, coiling lights and deflating inflatables, and storing it all in the garage of my second house. The neighborhood looked normal again. Quiet, calm, maybe even a little boring, but I'd made my point. A few days later, I got a formal letter from the HOA. I expected another violation notice or some final attempt at retribution from Patricia's remaining allies on the board. Instead, it was an apology. Dear Mr. Quinn, on behalf of the Board of Directors, I want to formally apologize for the harassment you experienced during your first months in our community. The actions taken by our former president were inappropriate and do not reflect the values of this neighborhood or this association. We hope you'll consider this matter resolved and that you'll continue to be an active and engaged member of our community. Sincerely, Margaret Spencer, HOA President. It was a nice gesture. Unnecessary, maybe, but nice. I put the letter on my refrigerator and got back to my normal life. I started consulting for a few tech startups, just enough to keep my brain engaged without the stress of running my own company. I joined David's poker game and became a regular. I even started dating someone, a teacher named Emma who thought the whole HOA war story was hilarious. As for the second house, I wasn't sure what to do with it at first. It seemed wasteful to just let it sit empty. I considered renting it out, but the idea of dealing with tenants didn't appeal to me. Then, Emma suggested I donate it to a local nonprofit that provided transitional housing for veterans. It took a few months to set up the legal structure and work out the details with the charity. But by spring, a formerly homeless Marine veteran named Marcus Thompson had moved in with his 2 kids. The HOA gave them zero trouble, probably because Margaret was president, and because nobody wanted to be the person who harassed a veteran and his children. Marcus and I became friends. His kids loved playing in the yard, and sometimes on weekends we'd barbecue in my driveway while they ran around with the neighborhood children. He got a job in construction, saved up some money, and eventually moved out into his own place. The charity moved another family in after him. The house that I'd bought out of spite, as the world's most expensive middle finger to an HOA president, ended up helping people who actually needed it. That felt right somehow. Like the universe had taken my petty revenge and turned it into something meaningful. Patricia, meanwhile, disappeared from neighborhood life. She stayed in her house but stopped attending meetings, stopped organizing events, stopped inserting herself into everyone's business. I'd see her occasionally, getting her mail or backing out of her driveway, but we never spoke. She'd look away whenever our eyes met, which was fine with me. Her criminal case wrapped up in February. She completed her community service, paid the restitution, and settled into her probation period without incident. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was thinking about moving, maybe to a condo in Phoenix where there'd be fewer HOA responsibilities and fewer reminders of her very public fall from grace. When December rolled around again, I put up decorations on my main house. Nothing crazy this time, just a tasteful string of white lights along the roofline and a wreath on the door. I didn't need to make a statement anymore. I'd already made it, and everyone knew exactly where I stood. But on Christmas Eve, just for fun, I set up one decoration on the yard of my second house, the one that was helping homeless veterans get back on their feet. A single inflatable Santa, 8 feet tall, waving cheerfully at everyone who drove past. Margaret Spencer, who turned out to be a reasonable and competent HOA president, stopped by that evening with cookies. "I see you couldn't resist entirely," she said, nodding at the inflatable Santa. "Just one, for old time's sake." "Well, for what it's worth, I think it's perfect." festive without being overwhelming, the kind of thing that makes people smile. That's all I wanted in the first place. She handed me the plate of cookies. I know Patricia never apologized to you directly. I don't think she's capable of it. But I want you to know that what happened to you was wrong, and I'm glad you fought back. A lot of people would have just given up and moved. I thought about it. But you didn't. And because you didn't, we have a better HOA now, more reasonable rules, better leadership. So thank you for being stubborn. After Margaret left, I stood in my driveway, eating cookies and looking at my single inflatable Santa. The neighborhood looked nice, all the houses decorated in their own ways. Some had elaborate displays, some had simple lights, a few had nothing at all. And that diversity, that freedom for people to express themselves however they wanted within reason, was exactly what a community should be. I never regretted buying that second house. Sure, it was expensive and impulsive and probably the most elaborate revenge plot anyone had ever launched over Christmas lights. But it taught me something important about standing up for yourself, about not letting petty tyrants control your life just because they have a little bit of power. Patricia had spent years as HOA president believing she could intimidate anyone into submission. She'd built her entire identity around controlling other people, enforcing rules that existed more to feed her ego than to actually improve the neighborhood. And for most people, her tactics worked. They were afraid of the fines, afraid of the conflict, afraid of being targeted. But I had something she didn't count on: resources, stubbornness, and absolutely nothing to lose. I didn't care about fitting in or making friends with the HOA board. I just cared about living my life without someone constantly breathing down my neck about stupid nonsense. The money I spent on that house, on the decorations, on the fines, none of it mattered in the long run. I had plenty of money. What mattered was the principle. What mattered was drawing a line and saying this far, no further, and in the end, I didn't just win. I turned the situation into something positive. A veteran and his kids got a place to live. The neighborhood got better leadership. The HOA rules became more reasonable. And I got to live in peace, decorating my house however I wanted without someone threatening me over it. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to. Patricia faced consequences for her actions, not life-ruining consequences, but real ones: a criminal record, probation, public embarrassment, the loss of her position and her power. She learned, probably for the first time in years, that actions have consequences, and that she couldn't just do whatever she wanted because she was HOA president. As I stood there that Christmas Eve, watching cars drive slowly past to see my single inflatable Santa, I felt something I hadn't felt since moving to Arizona. I felt at home, not because of the house or the neighborhood or the weather, but because I'd fought for my right to be myself, and won. I'd taken a stand against someone who thought they could control me, and I'd proven them wrong. The whole experience reminded me why I'd sold my company in the first place. I'd spent 20 years building a business, dealing with competitors and contracts and constant pressure to perform. When I finally cashed out, I'd promised myself I'd never let anyone push me around again. I'd never put myself in a position where someone else had power over my happiness or my freedom. And then, I'd moved into an HOA and immediately encountered someone who wanted to do exactly that. But I'd kept my promise to myself. I'd pushed back. I'd refused to be controlled. And I'd won, not through aggression or cruelty, but through patience, resources, and a willingness to be a little bit ridiculous in pursuit of a larger principle. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up to find a note taped to my door. It was from one of the neighbors, a woman named Susan who lived 3 houses down. She'd seen the inflatable Santa, and wanted me to know that her father was a Vietnam veteran who'd struggled with homelessness for years before getting help. The fact that I was using my second house to help other veterans meant everything to her family. She included a photo of her dad, a weathered man in his 70s wearing a Marine's cap and smiling at the camera. On the back, she'd written, "Thank you for honoring his service and the service of others like him." I kept that photo on my refrigerator next to the apology letter from Margaret. They both represented something important. The letter represented justice, accountability, the idea that even small-scale tyrants eventually face consequences. The photo represented redemption, the idea that even something born from spite and revenge can become something meaningful and good. Patricia never apologized, just like Margaret predicted. I didn't expect her to. People like that rarely admit they're wrong. They just quietly retreat, licking their wounds, blaming everyone else for their downfall. I heard she did eventually move, selling her house in March and relocating to a high-rise condo in Temp, somewhere with minimal HOA involvement and no neighbors to antagonize. I didn't feel bad for her. She'd brought everything on herself through years of bullying and harassment. But I didn't hate her either. She was just a sad person who'd found a tiny bit of power and let it corrupt her completely. If it hadn't been me she'd targeted, it would have been someone else eventually. I just happened to be the one with enough money and stubbornness to fight back effectively. The following December, Marcus, the veteran who'd first lived in my second house, stopped by with his kids. They'd moved into their own apartment 6 months earlier, and he'd saved enough for a down payment on a small house in Mesa. He wanted to thank me again and show me how far they'd come. His daughter, Emma, who was 7, had drawn me a picture of a house covered in Christmas lights with a giant Santa in the yard. "This is your house," she explained seriously. "The one with all the pretty lights that you put up when Daddy says we first got here." She was remembering the previous Christmas, when I'd put up a few decorations on the second house to make it feel more festive for Marcus and his kids. Nothing like the spectacular display from 2 years earlier, just enough to make the place feel like home during the holidays. "It's beautiful," I told her. "Can I keep it?" She nodded enthusiastically, and I added it to my refrigerator gallery. That year, I put up a moderate display on both houses. Not the insane explosion of lights and inflatables from the first year, but more than just a simple strand of white lights. The charity had moved another family into the second house, a single mom with 3 kids, and I wanted them to feel welcomed. The neighborhood had changed in subtle ways. More people decorated for the holidays. More kids played in the yards. More neighbors talked to each other, stopped to chat during evening walks, organized block parties and cookouts. It felt like a real community now, not just a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. Margaret Spencer turned out to be exactly the kind of HOA president the neighborhood needed. She enforced the rules that mattered, like making sure people maintained their properties and didn't create actual hazards. But she dropped the petty nonsense about grass height and mailbox colors. She created committees to handle disputes and encouraged neighbors to work things out among themselves before escalating to the board. Under her leadership, the HOA became what it was supposed to be: a tool for maintaining property values and organizing community resources, not a weapon for controlling people's lives. I stayed in the neighborhood for 3 more years before deciding to move on. Not because of any problems, but because I'd started spending more time with Emma, the teacher I'd been dating. She lived in Sedona, and we'd been doing the long-distance thing for a while. When she asked me to move in with her, I said yes. I sold my main house to a young couple with a baby on the way. They loved the neighborhood and the schools and were thrilled to be moving to Arizona from Chicago. I transferred ownership of the second house fully to the veterans' charity, setting up a trust to cover property taxes and maintenance costs in perpetuity. They'd helped 5 families get back on their feet in 3 years, and I wanted to make sure they could continue that work. The day I moved out, half the neighborhood came by to say goodbye. David Chen organized a barbecue in his backyard. Margaret gave a speech about how I'd changed the community for the better, which made me uncomfortable but also kind of proud. Several people thanked me for standing up to Patricia, saying it had inspired them to push back against unfair treatment in other areas of their lives. Marcus drove up from Mesa with his kids. He'd brought me a gift, a plaque that read, "Thank you for your service." When I pointed out that I'd never been in the military, he just smiled and said, "You served your community." Same thing. I packed up the last of my belongings, loaded them into a moving truck, and took one final look at the 2 houses that had been the center of the strangest, most expensive, most surprisingly meaningful battle of my life. The new family in the second house had put up Christmas decorations even though it was only November. Nothing elaborate, just some lights and a small inflatable snowman. But it made me smile, thinking about how that house had started as a weapon in an HOA war and become a genuine force for good. As I drove away from the neighborhood for the last time, past the community entrance with its pristine landscaping and welcoming sign, I thought about everything that had happened since I'd moved to Arizona 4 years earlier. I'd come looking for a fresh start after my divorce. I'd wanted peace and quiet, and a chance to figure out what came next in my life. Instead, I'd gotten into a war with an HOA president, bought a second house out of spite, gotten someone arrested for vandalizing my Christmas decorations, helped reform an entire HOA board, and ended up providing housing for homeless veterans. Life rarely goes according to plan. Sometimes it goes better. I never saw Patricia again. I heard she'd taken a job working retail and temp, a significant step down from her previous career in real estate management. The criminal conviction had made it hard for her to find work in her field. Part of me felt bad about that, but a larger part remembered all the people she'd hurt over the years with her petty tyranny. She'd made choices. Those choices had consequences. That's how life works. Emma and I got married a year after I moved to Sedona. We bought a house together, a beautiful place with red rock views and no HOA. That last part was non-negotiable for both of us. We'd both had enough of busybody neighbors and arbitrary rules. We put up Christmas decorations every year. Tasteful ones, usually, though I always include at least one inflatable Santa as a tribute to the battle that changed everything. Emma thinks it's funny. She calls it my protest Santa and has been known to take pictures of it to send to friends with the caption, "Vincent's still fighting the good fight." I still keep in touch with people from the Scottsdale neighborhood. David and I text occasionally. Margaret sends me updates about the Veterans Charity House, including photos of the families who have lived there. Last I heard, they'd helped 14 families total, with several going on to buy their own homes. The whole experience taught me something valuable about standing up for yourself. It's easy to get pushed around by people with a little bit of authority. Bosses, bureaucrats, HOA presidents, anyone who has some small amount of power over your life. Most people just go along with it because fighting back seems too hard, too expensive, too risky. But sometimes you have to fight. Not because winning matters that much, but because surrendering would cost you something more important than money or time or convenience. It would cost you your self-respect. I could have taken down those first Christmas lights when Patricia demanded it. I could have submitted my request 30 days in advance the next year and followed all her arbitrary rules. I could have been a good little homeowner and let her have her way, but I would have hated myself for it. Every time I saw her, every time she came up with a new petty complaint, I would have been reminded that I'd backed down, that I'd let someone push me around in my own home. So I bought a second house and covered it in decorations instead. Was it excessive? Absolutely. Was it expensive? Definitely. Was it worth it? Every single penny, because I didn't just beat Patricia. I didn't just get her removed from the HOA board. I changed the entire culture of that neighborhood. I showed people that you don't have to accept bullying, even when it comes wrapped in the official language of bylaws and community standards. And in the process, I created something that helped people who actually needed it. The second house could have just been a monument to my stubbornness, an empty building that served no purpose except to prove a point. Instead, it became a home for families who were struggling, a stepping stone to better lives. That's the thing about revenge. If you do it right, if you're smart and patient and just a little bit creative, you can turn it into something more than just getting even. You can make the world a tiny bit better while also proving your point. Every Christmas, when I put up my protest Santa in Sedona, I think about that neighborhood in Scottsdale. I think about Patricia and her printed bylaws and her belief that she could control everyone around her. I think about the night she snapped and destroyed my decorations, the moment when her petty tyranny crossed into actual crime. And I think about all the families who have lived in that second house, the one I bought to prove a point and ended up donating to help others. I think about Marcus and his kids, about that single mom with 3 children, about all the people who got a second chance because I was stubborn enough to fight back against an HOA president. The Christmas lights were never really about Christmas. They were about freedom, about the right to live your life without someone constantly looking over your shoulder, inventing problems where none existed, wielding tiny amounts of power like they were running a dictatorship. Patricia represented every petty tyrant who'd ever made someone's life miserable over nothing, every boss who nitpicked good employees, every bureaucrat who hid behind regulations to avoid using common sense, every small person who found a little power and corrupted themselves with it. And I'd beaten her, not through violence or cruelty, but through patience and resources and a willingness to be ridiculous in pursuit of a principle. That, more than anything else, was what made the whole thing worthwhile. So every year, I put up my protest Santa. I hang lights on my house, never asking permission, never submitting forms, never worrying about what some busybody might think. And I smile, remembering the look on Patricia's face when she realized she'd finally pushed someone who would push back harder, someone who had the resources and the determination to turn her weapon against her. It's a good memory, one I'll carry for the rest of my life. The memory of the time I went to war with an HOA over Christmas decorations, and came out the other side not just victorious, but better for it.